Hello, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this event today on behalf of Tate. I want to open with a remark by the climate policy advisor, Ruth Greenspan-Bell, written in May 2006 in an article entitled "What to Do About Climate Change." In the years ahead, climate change will have a significant impact on every aspect of the daily lives of all human beings, possibly greater even than war, and yet climate change remains low on the list of most countries' foreign policy concerns and has yet to be treated as a subject for serious, sustained action. Part of the problem is that the threat still feels abstract. Despite accumulating evidence, the full impact of climate change has not yet been felt. For now, it can only be modelled and forecast. End of quote. It is evident that this challenge needs cultural change, not just technological change. And artists are a part of this cultural evolution, as are we all. We need imagination as well as information to help us make our choices and face the challenges ahead. For many of us in the Western world, the issues do seem remote, the impacts invisible. Tate has begun to do what a museum can do to reduce our own carbon emissions. We've done the museum equivalent of turning the thermostat down a degree at home by relaxing by a few degrees the parameters for tight environmental control of temperature and humidity in our collection displays and stores. We've also made significant progress in reducing our waste and consumption of electricity and gas, and measured our carbon footprint, including the art that we transport to and from galleries all around the world. And we're working to scale up this work nationally and internationally to help influence the cultural sector in shifting towards lower carbon practices and lower carbon building design. This is not a time for polarized debate. We need rigor and passion. We need vision and pragmatism. Now more than ever, scientists and artists are engaged in dialogue, and we need their combined imaginations and analyses. And so Tate has welcomed this opportunity to collaborate with the Royal Society in this their anniversary year, to see what might ensue from this shared dialogue and expertise.
The Royal Society is celebrating its 350th anniversary, and it seems very appropriate that we should work with Tate Modern to try and do something a little bit different on the climate change front. The Royal Society is deeply engaged and deeply involved in climate science, but and we think we do that very well. But of course, we're not very good necessarily at telling the public, informing the public, encouraging the public to engage in that activity and, if necessary, change lifestyles and run society in a rather different way. And therefore, the opportunity to use the emotional expertise, the various expertises that Judith has mentioned, in order to get that message across and to try and get people thinking in different ways and maybe acting in different ways is a great opportunity and a great challenge, and we're very pleased for that. We're very pleased to be part of it. It would be naive to think there's one solution to the climate change issue, and it's even more naive to think we're going to find it today. However, today we have an opportunity to talk in this group, scientists, artists, and no doubt others as well who play other roles in society, and to share experiences and maybe will come forward with some ideas. But it's the beginning of a dialogue, it's not the end, and it's certainly not a solution, final solution to any of the major problems that the world faces. So there are many future scenarios, many choices, and I guess the task of human society in UK and globally is to find the optimum path from those choices and the way forward. And using art and science together, as Judith has eloquently said, is certainly one way in which we can progress in that task.
So I'm going to unashamedly go back to what is the greenhouse effect, because I think many people do not really know what we mean by this. And it comes back to that sun which drives the whole energy, it drives our weather and it drives our climate. And that's meant to be planet Earth in blue there, and the sun shining down on it, providing the energy. And that energy warms up the planet, and then this heat is given off in all directions to outer space. And when we have our climate system in balance, then that's the sun's energy coming in and received is balanced by the heat given off. Now, the actual layer of the atmosphere from which that heat is given off is determined by the so-called greenhouse gases. Now, these gases in our atmosphere are actually transparent to the sun. They let all the sun's radiation through, but then they stop the heat escaping. And it only escapes to space from the high levels of the atmosphere where there's not so many greenhouse gases left. And those high levels of the atmosphere are cold. And so the higher levels of the atmosphere don't lose as much heat. So that allows the Earth to be warmer than it would be otherwise. So without these greenhouse gases, our planet would be about minus 18 degrees Celsius. And it's about plus 15 on average. So greenhouse gases are a great thing. They allow us to live the life we do, or we wouldn't have developed as we are at all. However, like a lot of good things, maybe too much is not so good. So that if we add more greenhouse gases, then the layer from which this heat escapes is higher. At higher levels, it's colder. So that means there's less heat lost, and the atmosphere and the Earth system warms up until we get a new balance. And that's what we're doing if we add greenhouse gases.
Thank you very much for inviting us to be here. I'm Bob and this is Lucy, and we're going to share with you a conversation which we've been having for about 18 months around a project which we're working on collectively. Just to say a little bit about where my perspective comes from. We've heard a lot about climate science, but the reality of engaging with it and making a difference, our response to it has to fit in to many other agendas. So the interplay between biodiversity and climate change is significant. Biodiversity provides all of our material resources, but particularly significant, I think, in this context, is the ecosystem services of nature, how it provides fresh water, how it provides soil fertility, how it allows, in its capacity, to ameliorate and manage drought and flood resistance, and has a major influence on climate in terms of its influence on the movement of water and the management of carbon. So that sort of broad picture is an issue which I'm interested in exploring, and how we engage and understand that and make a difference. So biodiversity is not an issue of a luxury of the West for us to charitably support when we're saving tigers. It's actually to do with the necessity of the poor of resources which are needed, and it underpins the health and wealth of humanity. If we are out of balance with biodiversity, then we have major problems.
We began a discussion about 2 years ago with the Natural History Museum, and it became important for us to think about the issue of biodiversity, particularly because this year is the International Year of Biodiversity, and there'll be a convention being signed in Nagoya in October, a new convention on biodiversity. So that was a starting point for us to begin thinking about creating a new body of work, which we've entitled Amazonia. And one of our projects that we're developing at the moment has come out of some time that we spent in the Manu Learning Centre, which is in the heart of the rainforest along the river Madre de Dios. And that's been leading to the development of this collaborative artwork, together with scientists from the Environmental Change Institute at Oxford University. So we're documenting all the different species that we come across along that journey from the glacier, the tiny little plant species, the flowers, and growth that we can see with our macro lens and enlarge thanks to the photography. We tried some drawing, which didn't prove that easy in the rainforest, and we also worked together with a sound engineer and a video cameraman to record this expedition, this exploration. These are some images from the glacier on the left, the cloud forest at Waikecha, through the Trocha Union. Also, we spent some time with the villagers, recording conversations together with them, and some more walking along the Troch Union and the Madres Diaz River, which led us to the Manual Learning Centre. This is just a fragment of some of the photography that we've undertaken. So some of these species are minuscule little flowers, and some are quite large plant species. And this will form the basis of our visual archive that we'll be using to create the artworks at the Natural History Museum. And some of our thoughts about the expedition and what we hope to achieve with the exhibition. We hope to focus, of course, the attention on these thousands of species that depend on the equilibrium of the Amazon. And we know that the state of the Amazon alone covers 1.57 million kilometres of forest. That's 6 times the surface of Great Britain. And we would like to reflect on this fragile balance and the coexistence of the cycles of life and death, and with a deeper appreciation of the natural world, which is closer to each of us. And I guess this takes us to the impact, the exhibition impact. What we both hope, the museum as artists hope, will be outcomes from the exhibition. So raise awareness to the loss of biodiversity and our dependence on diversity and its need for protection and celebration, and make more apparent this interrelationship between biodiversity and environmental change, including climate change, of course. And through this work, the Perpetual Amazonia work, create an involvement in an experience and an understanding, of course, a debate and personal action about biodiversity.
Another possibility is to think less about how science stimulates perhaps the production of visual images in art, to think about how art itself can stimulate science. And people have often attributed to H.G. Wells and to Jules Verne prescience and a wonderful ability to think into the future and anticipate things that happen. Well, actually, maybe they weren't anticipating. Maybe they were actually stimulating them. Maybe, just maybe, Jules Verne's Nautilus submarine actually inspired engineers and scientists to create the kinds of submarine technologies that subsequently developed. H.G. Wells, writing about aircraft and so on, stimulating scientists and technologists to actually fulfill the dreams of artists. I find that a somewhat more interesting vision of the relationship. And as we think about adaptation, particularly to climatic change, I think we need to be thinking more generally actually about adaptation to climate. Climate has always been dangerous. There's this phraseology in the Framework Convention on Climate Change that the object of the convention is to avoid dangerous climate change. Climate has always been dangerous, as well as beneficial. And humans have a remarkable capacity to adapt to inhospitable climates, whether they're hot, cold, wet, or dry. And often, settlement in harsh conditions has been pioneered by the poor and the marginal. It's also the poor and the dispossessed who come up with intriguing solutions. And this is the solution which people have come up with on the Tonle Sap Lake in Cambodia. This is a lake that rises and falls considerably with the Asian monsoon. And their solution, these are people who are too poor to buy land. They were dispossessed, and in any case, the land around the edge of the lake is subject to frequent flooding. So what do? They built on the water. And this is a floating village. Then you find these all over Asia. This is another one in Vietnam. The Aberdeen settlement in Hong Kong harbour is another. And this brings me finally, or close to finally, to the idea of cities of the future, because here's a floating village in the Netherlands. The Dutch are now picking up on this idea. They're constructing these houses which are able to rise and fall about 14 feet with fluctuations in water level. And this brings me to the connection with Thomas's artwork, because I think when we look at Thomas's artwork, he's taking this idea of the floating city even further and taking it out of the water and having the city floating actually in that dynamic atmosphere that Brian Hoskins described in his talk. If we think that the biggest challenge for us in coming to grips with climate change may well be the locked-in thinking that we have about what is possible, what Thomas's work does for us is it opens up, I think, a space for us to think about alternatives. This particular application may not actually be something which is realized on a vast scale in the future, but that's not the point. The point is what conceptual space does it open up for technologists, for scientists, and for people to think about alternative ways of organizing their human settlements. And I think of science mediated through the medium of novel materials and applications, such as that embodied in Thomas's art, opens up for us new possibilities, breaking the conceptual lock-in and the habits of thought that we are so ingrained in, and opens up the possibilities of new blue sky thinking.
But anyway, going back a little bit to their conversation is always challenging, saying, hey, if Venice, we were able to build it on the water, not so intelligent maybe as the floating houses, but we might be able to maybe continue in the future and have something floating up in the air. And there are just some images how I was thinking back some years. And then, you know, we have some nice conversation also with Brian on how many clouds, and 50% of the planet Earth is covered with clouds and the different geometries, and how we might be able to somehow think the future structure of the cloud city or the airport city, which I call them, in a kind of a more organic way, in somehow that you could keep adding modules, or you could think like each module is a house or is a museum or wherever you understand, and then somehow could grow and shrink more accordingly of the wishes, or the kind of the relationship with the environment and with the. I mean, I like Felix Guattari when he described like the three ecologies, and he talked about the ecology of mind, ecology, social ecology, and environmental ecology. I think so the conjunction of these three ecologies is something which my interest when I think about this kind of city. And then a little bit more in the future is like, yeah, huge pattern and how they could move around and something like this. What this we have seen. A little bit what I have been working a little bit is like, okay, how we could somehow think how this solar energy can be concentrated inside of one of these spheres. And then basically it's just, there is a transparent part, and then there are some mirrors, and then what's happened, the sun go there, and then in the core of the center there is a kind of lightweight solar panels, and then somehow focalize the energy to the center, make it much more light, and somehow is more efficient the way of, and more cheap the way of collecting the energy. And I try to explain you a little bit the experience of being inside one of these kind of spheres. As you can see, it's a kind of very huge volume of air, and okay, on the left, there are the tillandsia plants, these air plants which live basically from the air. They don't have roots, or if they have, are not a parasite from other plants, and they can survive only by the humidity you find in the air. In Argentina, we have them, many of them, and it was a challenge. I mean, I'm pretty interested in this idea of biosphere, and you know, ISS, International Space Station, is the more sustainable environment that human have been built in a kind of great collaboration between different countries.
Well, first of all, I would like to hear you, Steve. Do you think it's about adaptation, this session, do you think that it would actually be possible to imagine somehow sustainable living, or a city built which could include buildings in the sky, as Sarcino and Thomas is proposing?
For me, that's not really the point. I think it's...
Sorry.
It's not whether you could actually build a metropolis the size of, well, even Oxford, let alone London, in the sky using the sorts of materials that Thomas is dealing with. I think it's the mental opening that Thomas provokes us with that is important. I think it's also, and this is where I do disagree a little bit with Anthony Gormley, because I think actually that one of the things that links art and science is the whole field of craft and artisanship, and in a sense this is one of the things that both artists and scientists have in common, is their craft skills to work with materials and technologies and techniques.
Can you imagine this art-science conversation influencing dialogues at the highest levels of government and also in industry, where people are resisting making these changes because you have economics out there that don't want people to fly Zeppelins? They want them to make these brand new jumbo jets that can carry 500 people and cost lots and lots of money. So I just wondered how much this kind of collaboration, which is key, can start to influence at the highest levels of both government and industry.
Yeah, I will never, I don't know, I like the idea of today. I think so someone was introduced, like, I think so, or at least how I see the things. I try not to divide the things, and I try to think like more how we can work together. And also you and me, it's like not you are sitting there, it's like more like come up here, then later we're going to think together, right? It's like, I think so this effort not to try to divide. Yesterday also my comment was art and sciences, let's try not maybe to have it separated, because this idea of also separated nature from our own inhabitation places is also maybe cause you trouble to understand that is your own house, nature. And then just only to make the exercise to call, oh, the politician is so far away. Yesterday we saw a great idea of this 10-10 or whatever, what the people who have been seeing the movie. I think so it's more flexible, and it's not seeing more or less this kind of huge division between things, and more like, hey, how we can collaborate to do something together somehow, as I would like.
I started out as a poet, but gave up poetry for the visual expression. When I lost my language, I realized that art had to change in a world drastically changing, when humanity was facing major decisions in order to survive on the planet while striving to maintain moral values and the quality of life. I wanted to cleanse art from its elitist self-involvement to achieve greater universal validity. I left the ivory tower of my studio and entered the world of concerns. I wrote books, spoke at global conferences, and began to create large-scale environmental projects I called Philosophy in the Land. That's the beginning of Wheatfield, a confrontation that I mentioned before. It's a block from Wall Street, the so-called world center of economics, and that's what I planted on because I had no money. I only had money enough for 1 inch of topsoil, but I figured if Japan can do it, so can I. And planted the rice. Next, please. That's the World Trade Center, which was 2 blocks away. And that's the Statue of Liberty across the Hudson. Next. And that's me without a haircut for a year. And the ocean liners passing the wheat field. It's a photograph I took at 5 o'clock in the morning. Next, please. That's my harvest. I harvested many bushels of healthy golden wheat. This is the mathematical expansion system. It's based on the pineapple sunflower pattern in the golden section. Next. The beginning of the building of the mountain, it's a restitution for a mine that destroyed the land. The reason they had to build a mountain for me is because any mountain that had no trees on it means that they can't live on that mountain. And any mountain that had trees, I was not going to cut down. So they had to build this mountain for me. It took an extra 4 years. Next, please. Here I'm planting the first tree with the president of Finland, and those are the Finnish children who helped us. Next, please. Each planter received a certificate. It's the first human certificate good for 400 years into the future. They can leave it to their children, their children's children, and a community of 11,000 people will be connected with the tree and become millions in the 400 years. And they are the owners of the tree. They can't move it. There's no money changing hands. They are just in systems feeling that they're helping the earth.
I'm here to talk about geoengineering the planet. That is the deliberate manipulation of the environment to control the planet. It's like having brighter clouds by putting pumps in the ocean so you can put sea salt in the atmosphere and that brightens the cloud, or putting desert reflectors. They have this one is low cost, desert reflectors are high cost, but they both have high risk in that for sure these will cause regional climate change, particularly desert reflectors, which is so close to the African monsoon that is important for rain in many critical regions. And they have relatively sizable effect potentially. And then there are other methods like brighter crops or brighter roofs, which brighter roofs have high cost, or cost doesn't matter here because they have relatively low effect, low efficiency. So in all this, I would like to say that in the vast majority of methods, we're not even close to achieving any implementation where we're missing in terms of observations, we're missing in terms of knowledge of what is happening. And we're very, very far away from the grand unification theory that could help us understand everything that Agnes Dennis is proposing. And also, I would like to say that scientists can assist in the process of looking at geoengineering options, which at the moment are very largely driven by companies that see the benefits, monetary benefits of proposing geoengineering options. But scientists can really only assist in the process. Really, what is happening here is that whether we mitigate or not, or we adapt or not, or we geoengineer or not, the scientists are a little bit out of this. Is really a societal choice. So the choice that you will make and we will make together.
To what extent are there things being put in place to enable us to, if we do geoengineering, to do it sensitively? Because we don't know all those wonderful little flowers that Lucy Orta was showing further down the line, what our meddling is going to affect to the tiniest detail for however long.
I think at the moment we could not do geoengineering for most of the options sensibly, except reforestation, afforestation, and some more basic things. I think it's about growing the thinking into this direction, and if it is growing in the commercial world, it has to grow scientifically as well, and it has to grow, there has to be a public debate on whether this is an acceptable option or not, and this hasn't taken place yet. So we're only at the beginning of addressing questions about geoengineering, and there are questions coming from all directions. And I think, in my opinion, is that we cannot put our heads in the sand now. This is too dangerous because there is a lot of money involved in geoengineering, and if the public is not conscious and if the science is not behind, then a lot of very dangerous things can happen.
It has to be a global doing. You do something here, and it affects the world somewhere else. So what we were talking about in global conferences 40, 45 years ago is now just beginning to be the green revolution. And I'm so sorry to say that it took this long for it to get started, but we have it now. And what we need is for overcome nationality and become global in thinking, that we don't hurt somebody else with our mistakes and what we are doing.
We had several questions. It boils down to roughly what's the message that the scientists want to get out there on geoengineering, and who is best placed to deliver it? Is it the artists, the scientists, or is it a combination of both, and how they're going to do it?
I'll start with geoengineering, and I'll put it to the panel. I don't know who wants to start off. Who gets to control geoengineering? And I'd like to ask a question related to the question that was put to the group, which is fear, and is, well, in fact, are fear and guilt useful emotions in order to stimulate action?
Well, I hope the answer to that is everybody, but we have to figure out a way to do it. And I don't know how to do that, but I and the other people that I talk to about this all care very much about finding a solution to this, so that there are quite a lot of discussions going on. I don't have the answer, but I can say that the process is beginning, and the problem we have goes back to some of the communications questions, is how actually can we communicate with a lot of people? If I could just answer the fear and guilt one, I think the answer is yes, but. Fear certainly motivated me to think about things that I would otherwise not have done. But on the whole, people respond much better to positive emotions than to negative emotions. So fear and guilt may be enough to get you started, but you probably need positive reasons for doing things, such as a better world for your grandchildren, to actually make progress. So I hope we can find those positive messages, and this all applies to climate change in general as well as to geoengineering, to try and help us communicate the message, which, as I think we're all aware, we're not doing well enough at the moment. We have to do better.
I just wanted to say that if you guys think that a platform where art and science would meet would be a good place for ideas to convey and to get them in a easier to digest to the public way, since you will get the scientific facts and then the artistic point of view, would that help us to convey the urgency of the message? And if an institution like the Tate was to convey a space, to provide that sort of space, how important would that be for that institution to have a clear funding, that its funding is coming from the sources that are really looking into this kind of issues seriously?
I think so. I hope so. I guess that's why I'm here today. And I think this has been a very interesting day for me, and I hope this is not the end of the process. I hope this can be the beginning of a continuing process.
I'd just like to say that I think one of the really warm and welcome things for me is the reimagining which artists can bring, so that when we're dealing with difficult issues, there are a range of possible alternatives emerging which we can see as positive ways to move forward. So we're not immersed in the negative and the impossibility of the circumstances, but actually constructive alternatives are there for us to debate and work towards. And I think that becomes a very constructive process and a necessary process which brings a wider spectrum of people together in that decision making.
Excellent. Well, that actually is a very good note to close things on. I'd like to thank everybody and thank the Tate and the Royal Society for organising this meeting. I think everybody has risen to the challenge. Personally, I came to this with a slightly sceptical point of view, I've got to confess. But I've been won over. I thought it was a fascinating day. I was impressed by the refusal that everybody proved to abide by boundaries, and I think that in particular is possibly where science and art meet. And I was very encouraged to see the word imagine in the title of the session, because I think there's sometimes you can get bogged down by doom and gloom when you talk about climate change, and you can get very depressed by the prospect of what the future might look like. And I think that's a mistake, because I think being depressed about the future is in fact doing a huge disservice to human imagination and to our capacity to cope with enormous problems. So on that note, thank you, everybody.